Hi, crafties, and welcome to Weekend Crafting Adventures. I'm Kim. In this week's crafting project, I am putting my Cricut Maker's rotary blade to work, and I am actually cutting 10 different fabrics that I'm going to use to create some unique tassels to make some tassel keychains as gifts. Let me tell you a little bit about the inspiration behind this crafting project. There are a couple. The first one is that I am so interested to continue to learn about cutting fabric with my Cricut Maker. The list of fabrics under the materials when you hit the fabric list is huge. And really, I've only just kind of cut maybe a couple of different kinds of fabrics with my Cricut Maker and the rotary blade, some with great success and some with absolute fails. So I thought that this would be the perfect project to do a little bit of investigating on how my Cricut Maker cuts different fabric material for about 2.5-inch long tassels. And the other inspiration behind this project is that at the end of April and the beginning of May, there are a lot of celebrations happening, a lot in the school environment with Teacher Appreciation and Administrative Assistance Day. There's also Mother's Day coming up, and we also have some family get-togethers and celebrations in the near future. I wanted to put together some tassel wristlet keychains as part of some gifts that I'm going to be giving some friends, family, and coworkers. So, like I said, this is super fun. I had a blast doing this because I am putting my Cricut Maker to the test with a bunch of different fabrics. So what I'm going to do is highlight the resource that I used, which really was just one, and that was the Cricut Design Space project called Leather Tassel Keychain, and it is in Cricut Design Space. And that is really the only resource that I used. The cut file is right there in the project, and it pulls right up into your Cricut Design Space canvas. You can resize it for whatever size tassel you want to make. I did keep most of mine, all but one, at the 2.5-inch long for the entire tassel, but you can resize it if you're looking for a different size for a tassel. So that was the resource that I used. And then I did use 10 different fabrics for this project. I have all of them in my crafting corner because I am a huge sewer, but I did want to highlight a couple of specific materials for this project, and everything else, all the materials and the mats I used and all of the extra information will be posted on my blog, on my website. If I am not mentioning it on this podcast, you can always refer to that blog post, and it has all of the extra information about my experience doing this project. So I did get some metal keychains. I got some lobster clasps that I'm adding on to the keychains just because I want it to be the kind of keychain that you can either hang on a bag or in a tote or on a backpack or something like that. And of course, I kept going with my bead theme of bracelets from my last project and actually found some really fun, big, chunky, round beads that I'm using as part of the tassel keychain as well. So those can either go on your wrist or it just looks really fun and can be used as an accessory, like I said, hanging on a bag or something like that. I did use transfer tape for some of the cutting. I did use painter's tape for some of the fabric, and I also used all three mats that I have. I used my fabric mat, my standard grip mat, and my strong grip mat in this crafting project. I am going to spend most of my time in this podcast talking about the experience of cutting each of the fabrics and sharing that information with you. I will spend a little time talking about making the actual tassels, but really what is so fun about this project and what I want to share with you is the difference in cutting the 10 different fabrics and how they cut with my rotary blade and my Cricut Maker. So I'm going to start off by sharing the 10 fabrics that I chose to use for making the tassels. I chose to use a cotton fabric, a duck canvas, a regular canvas, a waxed canvas, a sheer sateen shimmery chiffon type fabric, tulle, cork fabric, oilcloth, sequin fabric, and some stretchy glitter spandex fabric. So those were the materials that I chose, and I figured that would give me a great variety to create some really unique tassels that I'm going to be putting onto my gifts. So let me tell you about each of these fabrics and how they cut. The cotton fabric. First of all, I have cut cotton fabric before, and what I have learned in those experiences is that I get the best cut when I use my standard grip mat and I put the cotton fabric either on with a fusible backing and using transfer tape under the fabric on top of the cutting mat. I wasn't going to use any fusible backing for this project for the tassel. So all I did was put my cotton fabric onto the transfer tape, onto the cutting mat, and away it went. It worked great. There's a little bit of fraying with the cotton, but I feel like because of the tassel and the cuts, that is to be expected. But it went great, and that was a good cut. My duck canvas, that I cut on my standard grip mat with masking tape, and I used the canvas setting, cut very well. Also some fraying, a little bit of fraying with that, but it kind of makes for a rustic looking tassel. So I don't mind how the fraying turned out. I actually think it adds a bit of character to the tassel. Let's see, regular canvas, that again, I used my fabric mat for that one, and I did tape it down with the painter's tape. It was a little bit thicker of a fabric, and experience has taught me that use that painter's tape to secure all of your edges down when cutting on the fabric mat and those thicker fabrics. Cutting the sheer sateen chiffon was really easy, came out really well. There were a few little cuts that were not perfectly even, but overall it cut really well. I was impressed with that. And the tool cut so well. I was so surprised because this is such a delicate fabric. I mean, literally, you see through this fabric. It's an accent fabric in a lot of ways. It's that tutu material. And so I really did not expect to get a clean cut with the tool, but Cricut did a great job. So that was super exciting. I definitely was impressed by how the rotary blade cut that tool with such precision. Let's see, cork fabric. Well, I definitely have cut cork fabric before on the Cricut Maker, but I really wanted to make a tassel with the cork fabric, so I added it in as one of the 10. And the important thing about cutting the cork with the rotary blade is that you use the denim setting. That's what I learned in my last project when I made my little card holders with the cork fabric. I also used transfer tape to hold that cork down onto the cutting mat. This was a fun one. The next one was the oilcloth. This did not surprise me that it was one of the best cuts that I got during this project. Oilcloth fabric is a lot like vinyl, so the Cricut is an expert at cutting vinyl, and no surprise here, the oilcloth cut really well. The lines were very precise. There was no lifting of the material, and it just really came out great. Here's where things got a little bit disappointing. So I added the sequin material into the 10 fabrics that I wanted to cut. It is one of the materials that is listed for the rotary blade and the Cricut Maker. But unfortunately, this was not a good experience. I taped down my sequined material to a standard grip mat with painter's tape around the entire piece of fabric that had the sequins on it. I made sure that the way that the fabric was going into the Cricut Maker was so that the sequins would go up and down with the roller if they were. But really, I mean, when I put it on the cutting mat, the sequin material went right under the rollers, no problem. What ended up happening, though, is that on top of it sounding awful, and I'm probably pretty sure now I'm going to need to get a new rotary blade, is that I am thinking the tassel cuts were too thin or too close together to work with the sequin fabric. It just really didn't work. And I was so disappointed because I thought it would be so fun to have a tassel made with the sequin fabric. But really, I mean, I only got a couple of cuts. They didn't go all the way through. And actually, my Cricut stopped in the middle of cutting the sequin fabric and started blinking the red light, which that made me really nervous because that tells me that either it's overheated or something is wrong. And I really love my Cricut, so I was hoping that it wasn't completely broken. But that was my experience with the sequins. cutting sequins for me with the Cricut Maker so far is an absolute no. I definitely will be doing some investigation to see what I maybe did wrong, what kind of sequin fabric it suggests cutting, and maybe the kinds of cuts that that I could try to have a more successful experience with the sequins, but unfortunately, that one was a no-go. And then the final fabric that I cut with my Cricut Maker was this shimmery, glittery, stretchy spandex kind of fabric. And Cricut did well. It did okay with it, pulled off a little bit of the glitter on the areas where the blade went through, but it still turned out with a good enough cut and a good enough look that I definitely made it into a tassel. So those are the 10 fabrics that I tried. And this was such a fun experiment. I feel like I'm slowly working my way through the huge list of fabrics and materials that Cricut can cut. But let me tell you about the best cuts. The best, absolute best cuts that I got from my Cricut Maker were the oilcloth and the cork fabric and the waxed canvas. Wow, they were absolutely perfect, precise, and the tassels are awesome. I'm going to say that my grouping of what Cricut cuts well, not perfect, but they cut well, are my canvases, the duck and the canvas, my cotton fabric, the sheer chiffon, the tulle, and that spandex I'm going to bring down a little bit lower, but only because I was using a glitter one. And I do think that because of the way the cuts went, some of that glitter came off on those cuts, so it's not as shiny as it was before I had Cricut cut it. And of course, my worst cut, the worst experience, and the big fail of this crafting project was the sequin fabric. It just didn't do it. It didn't cut through it. My machine stopped working. I was concerned that I'd broken my machine. So I definitely need to do a little more investigation around the sequins. I did want to spend just a couple minutes talking about the tassels and making the tassels with the different fabrics. This was a really fun and pretty easy process. So making the tassels is definitely a beginner, easy level project. These tassels are cut so that you just tuck over one piece of the material, and that tail, I'm going to call it, becomes a loop, and you just really roll the material on top of itself, adding a little bit of fabric or permanent glue, depending on what material you're using, as you're rolling the tassel, and that's it. I did follow along with what the Cricut project suggested, which was to put a little bit of ribbon around that tassel. So I had a lot of fun choosing a unique ribbon that would accent each of the materials and the tassels. That was really fun, pretty easy process putting that ribbon on. And the tassels are done, but I did want to share with you a couple of things that I did. I combined the the glittery spandex with the chiffon material to create a really big poofy tassel for one of my keychains. So that was really fun. Instead of just using them individually, I also did that with my cotton fabric and my tulle. And I absolutely love how those combinations of fabric turned out in the tassel. So that was really fun. My favorite tassel is the waxed canvas tassel. Just everything about it, how it cut, how it rolled, putting it together, and how it looks on the keychain is just, it's awesome. So let me tell you my crafting keepers for this crafting project. My first one, I just said it, is cutting the waxed canvas with my Cricut and my rotary blade. I'm so excited about this. I love working with waxed canvas. It is a really cool fabric. I use it a ton in sewing projects for a real rustic look, and it just cut like butter, seriously. So the whole experience and how it looks, cutting that wax canvas, I cannot wait to figure out some more projects to do with my maker and the wax canvas. So that was my first crafting keeper. And my second crafting keeper is the combination of the cotton fabric and the tulle underneath to create a really fun, unique, textured tassel. I used a rainbow, repeating rainbow cotton fabric pattern. And then it was, pink background with the rainbows on it and a turquoise color tulle. And when I rolled them up together, it just created such a fun, vibrant, really happy tassel. And so that is my second crafting keeper. The combination of that fabric and the tulle when making a tassel, that is definitely going to stay in my crafting corner. My Satiscrafttion rating for this project is a 5. This was so much fun, investigating and learning more about a bunch of different materials that my Cricut can cut. I love how the tassel project on Cricut Design Space was to pull up in the canvas. This was a no-brainer in terms of just getting the actual cut file and get going on the project. They cut fairly quickly. And aside from the sequin fail, which it was my first time trying sequins, so I'm going to have to keep investigating that. But other than that, there's really nothing that I could say that would take this down from a 5. So I'm keeping it at a 5. I am wondering, has anybody cut sequins with their rotary blade and had a successful experience? Shout it out in social media or shoot me an email at hello@wcapodcast.com. And I will have lots of fun videos of the cutting process, the different materials, and how these keychains turned out on my blog post, on my Instagram. So check it out. And until our next crafting adventure, take care.
That's all for this episode of Weekend Crafting Adventures. Now go get that Cricut machine off the shelf and get crafty. For more information on this crafting project, interesting tips, tricks, and techniques, visit wcapodcast.com. Until next time, when we embark on another adventure.